All right, thank you so much. I am really excited about this panel. We have a different angle on brands here. This is storytelling for brands. This is more on the artistic side of how do you tell a story to attract people to a brand. And we have two fantastic guests here, Thomas Elliott from Casual Films, Frida Jones from Epidemic Sound. Why don't we start off with you guys just explaining what your company is, who you are, what you do, and then we'll jump into it from there. Thomas?
Sure. So I work for Casual. Casual is a global strategic full-service video content agency. We help Fortune 500 companies and large brands all over the world to connect with their audiences, to develop great video strategies that follows through with great video content that helps them become one with their audiences. That's essentially what we do.
Yeah, so I'm Frida Jones from Epidemic Sound, and at the heart of what we do is providing content or music for storytellers around the world and for global brands. We work with Formula One, for example, who's doing it here today, and we have L'Oreal and Virgin Active. We also work with YouTubers and podcasts. And at the core of what we do is we have more than 400 artists that work for us and produce all of our music and sound effects in-house that we then provide in a very sort of safe way through the licensing. So when you use our sound and our soundtracks, you never have to worry about PRO, any claims, anything being muted or taken down, and that's sort of at the core of what we do. And I think it's about 2.5 billion views a day on YouTube and TikTok, which is soundtracked by our music and sound effects.
Wow, 2.5 billion, that's pretty amazing. And just to be clear, I mean, your soundtracks are in every kind of format, short format, documentary, everything, right?
Yeah, that's correct. And we're a music tech company. All the music is at the heart of everything we do. And that means that the player where we store all our music and soundtrack, it is... But to start off, I want to say we really believe in the human creativity. All of our music is produced by artists. But we do have a platform which is very much driven by AI. So you can go in, you can find what you want to do, you can find it easily, you can work around. Everything is really adaptable. Stems you can add and remove different music tracks. So it's a very adaptable platform. So yeah.
Great, well, let's jump in. I mean, in the context of brands, what is important when you're telling the story of a brand? Why don't we start with Thomas?
I think the important thing here, at the core of that, what matters is storytelling. It is the ability to tell a story that connects a brand, a product, a service, a solution to an audience in a meaningful way, at the right time, in the right place, that builds a connection with them. And I think that, to me, is the core of really great storytelling. And I think in the format that I work in, video is great for marketing, it's great for communications, it's great for brand. But I think the key to really great video is having a story that connects with the audience, that uses the visual medium in a way that makes the story interesting. Because I think, again, if you're going to do video, stories should be inherently visual. They should engage the audience in a way that uses the best of what video can do, which is the ability to combine image with sound, with music, with graphics, to tell a story that persuades an audience or drives them to take a measurable action that you want. That's basically what it should be doing.
Right.
Yeah.
I think normally when we think about storytelling, what comes to mind is the visual aspects of it. And I think for quite some time, music and sound has sort of been an afterthought and taking sometimes a bit of a backseat in the storytelling. And I think there's so much to be gained from a brand to really think about how sound and music should really play an important part in the storytelling. And what is the sound, what's the tone of voice for your brand? How do you ensure that you really resonate with the end user in the way you use your sound and the story, and not to sort of treat music as an afterthought. I think for many brands who are really successful in storytelling have content strategies and also align in their music strategy and sound strategies with that as well, to really make sure that you get the message across and you sound authentic across all medium and touch points where you communicate with your end audience.
Thomas, I'm going to put you on the spot here a little bit. You said it's important for the story to connect with the audience. I think that's absolutely right. Can you give me, since you're a filmmaker, this is your expertise, can you give me some ways in which the story can connect, or you can make it connect, or hope that it connects with the audience?
Sure. I mean, I think people often undervalue emotion in storytelling.
Right.
Emotion is a really powerful trigger because it is something that we all connect with. It is part of our human experience. And often the stories that we most connect with have emotion tied to them. And so for me, I think it's a really important challenge for brands is, and emotion doesn't mean that it has to make you cry, it doesn't mean it has to make you sad, it can make you laugh, it can bring joy to you. I think we live in an increasingly fragmented kind of world, and so people are often looking for something that builds that connection with them that has an emotional attachment to it. And people put a lot of emotion in brands, and I think going to what Frida was talking about, music is a really key ingredient in that because it is, we all have an emotional response to music. We all, it drives feeling, it connects, it builds the story. And so, I think to have that connection, you really need to have a strong story. It doesn't have to be a perfect story because in life, stories are not perfect. The way that we tell stories to each other is not perfect. And I think often, particularly when you're talking about, purely advertising, where we're trying to connect a story in a really short time frame, people obsess about perfect stories, but actually stories in life are not perfect. And often the stories that we like, that we share, like particularly when we talk about films, we had some great chats about films that we like.
Yeah.
You'll often find that those stories are not perfect. There are things about them that make it memorable, that connects to us because it connects to our experience. And that is really important in storytelling.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, I think those 2 points, the 2 key points of what I just heard you say is, one, it makes you feel something. There's some emotion there, makes you feel something, and then also you can relate it to your life experience. Even things that are very abstract, you can sometimes relate to your life experience. I think when we discussed talking about all this, we found that there's a lot of mistakes that are made when brands are trying to tell a story. Maybe you guys can let us know what mistakes you think are often made when a brand tries to tell a story or tries to tell its story. How about Frida?
Yeah, I think one of the most amazing things is with you build a strong brand is that you connect with the audience with the hearts and the minds, and it has to be long term. So you need to really build on that brand for a long, long time. And the way you connect with emotions and the storytelling you talked about, Thomas, is really important to do that in the right way. And when I think about one of the challenges, I think sometimes when working with global brands is that when they soundtrack or use sound effects is that they don't have a sound strategy or a music strategy. And then maybe they have global teams that work all the way around the globe and they all produce their own content. And then you add a bit of influencers in that as well, is that your sound can come across as inconsistent. And then what you risk is that you don't sound authentic anymore. And that's one of the worst things that can happen to a brand. A brand needs to you need to feel the brand, and the brand needs to have that longevity. So connecting with the storytelling in the way that sort of speaks to the brand, but also connecting with the music in a way that it's a tone of voice that people recognize, and then you can really truly build your brand long term as well.
Oh, before I get to you, Tom, I just want to ask you a further follow-up question. So you said, you need consistency. What does that look like in a sound? You're talking about a consistent melody, or are you talking about something more abstract than that?
Now, sometimes I think if you really want to do having a sound, is that you need to step back to who you are as a company and your brand and who you're talking to your audience. Where do you want to go and how do you want to get there? And then you can break that down into genres and brands and playlists and deep down and what's the brand, sonic brand for your brand, and then your mother brand, and then your small subsequent brands. And then I also think if you think about mistakes, there's also a tactical element to this. I think sometimes it's easy to overcomplicate it with sounds. And I think if you don't do it the right way, it can actually destroy the storytelling. It can take over. It can sort of sometimes go against the story you want to say. You can come across as inconsistent, or you might make the audience feel manipulated. So you should always lead with the story, and then the music should support. And I also think one thing that I think is important when it comes to sound and music is that it's a lot of trends going on, and everyone wants to jump on the trend. Of course, because you want to get out there and you want to get your message across. The challenge if you do that without having a foundation sound that you can really rely on is that trends tend to be short-lived, thereby in the word trends, and then it can also make your brand sound short-lived, and it can build in a weakness in the brand over time. So I wouldn't say not to jump on trends, but I think to do it very cautiously and carefully, whilst having a foundation in terms of how you sound like and who you speak to and why.
Right, and Thomas?
I think one of the questions I constantly ask, whenever I come in and meet with brands, often people are very clear about the message they want to communicate, and that'll be very clear in the brief. It'll be very clear when you're kind of sitting across the table and you're talking about it. One of the questions that I often put to people is, okay, I understand the message, but how do you want people to feel? What is it like through the film, through the story, through the pieces that we're making? How is it that you want them to feel, and how do you want them to feel afterwards? Because I think, again, visual content, when it's done correctly with a great combination of sound and picture and music, can take you on an emotional journey. You can be happy at points in the story, you can be sad, you can be nostalgic at the end. How do you want to map out that journey, and how are we going to get there through the story to kind of make sure that it hits all those key points? Because again, I feel like sometimes we can be over-focus on sort of an end result message, right? And not really think about the experience. And thinking about the experience is really important, because you have to understand that, the device we all have in our pockets that we carry with us everywhere, it changed everything when it came to...
We're getting to that.
I know we're getting to that. I'm teasing it for you.
You're jumping the gun, okay.
But, part of that is also understanding the physiographics of your audience and how they experience that content and where they experience it. Because, a lot of younger generations, they're going to watch their phone vertically. They're going to have headphones on. They're going to be watching it in a busy place. So thinking about how that story is going to hit with them in that moment is really important. And so you have to have those considerations about emotion. It can't just be about an end message. The end message will be much more effective if the emotion is there and it's driven in the right way.
So just to bring it back to the question, so the mistakes that you feel are made when people are telling a story visually,
Yep.
Is it like individual scenes, or you think overall the concept is bad for the...
No, I don't think the concept is bad.
No. That could be one of the mistakes.
It could be one of the things. I think overall there are two things. In a lot of stories, authenticity is a really important thing, as Frida mentioned earlier. And I think in authentic stories, one of the problems that brands can often have is they want to interject too much brand into that story. Whereas actually in authentic stories, particularly when you're talking about real people, letting them tell that story is really important, because actually the power of that story connects with the brand, builds the brand value, makes the audience have that feeling about your brand at the end. But if you kind of almost stuff in too much messaging into that, you've lost them. And so for me, emotion is what really makes that work.
Got it. Okay, thank you so much. So as you teased, we know that most people consume images and sound now through this little device. So how would you say brand storytelling has changed with the advent of the smartphone? Let's start with Frida.
Well, I think this completely changed the storytelling at its core with the smartphone, and also the different devices that people have at the same time as we have all of these new platforms available. There are so many ways to connect to our end audience. There's so many ways to sort of get out there and get your storytelling, your brand heard. And there's so many opportunities, but there's also so many ways to get it wrong. So I think this is one of the challenges. You've got to grab these opportunities, but you also got to stay true to your brand. So having some sort of 360, what are the touch points? How are we talking to them? What's the storytelling? What's the positioning? And how do we sound and look like? And then also I want to emphasize the risk of producing content for a specific channel and a specific market. Now when everything gets sort of sent global spread, how do we make sure that we protect our company and our brand as well from the content being muted, taken down, or even, you get a lawsuit for infringement. So also being mindful of how you produce now and being really extra careful to make sure that this is a positive experience and it doesn't affect your brand negatively.
Right. Let me see if I can summarize one of the points you made. Like in the old days, you could make a commercial for Swedish TV and it would only be seen on Swedish TV. But now the thing that you make is going to be seen all over the world at like all sorts of different peoples, and you have, because of the smartphone, and you have to be aware of that. You have to be cognizant of it.
You can't control the distribution in the same way, and that means it puts a lot of and it's always going to be in the hands of the person producing the content to make sure that what you put out there is actually safe and doesn't cause any problems with the company. So the legal aspect and the licensing aspects become increasingly important with this type of way of communicating, spreading content.
Right.
I would agree with the points that Frida made. I would also say we can often tend to with all the platforms that we make content for, and obviously, you know, the popular ones in Asia being things like WeChat, Facebook, Instagram, etc., 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 we can also often become really obsessed with formatting the story to that platform and taking with it the metrics that we understand about that platform. But in doing so, sacrifice having a really great story that is going to resonate, that's going to be universal across platforms. And I think that's something that brands often need to really think about. And again, getting to Frida's point about distribution, you might have designed something with the intent of being on Instagram, but whether it stays on Instagram or ends up on another platform, it may well do so,
Right.
and somebody may discover it somewhere else. So staying true to really what you wanted the story to be about so that it works across the platforms. So yes, of course, by all means, tailoring it to what you know the audience demographics are on those platforms, tailoring it in a way that it will work for that, but also just making sure that the core universal story that you are telling is really great, right? Because audiences love great storytelling. We know that. That's why we still go and see movies. That's why we binge watch stuff on Netflix. We love great content that speaks to us, that feels like it was designed for us.
Right, yeah. We talked about this for artists and novelists and filmmakers are constantly saying storytelling is actually the substance of our life. Without a story, life has no meaning. So it's a pretty crucial thing. I'm really interested because you guys have, you know, different companies and different expertise. What is the process that your company takes when undergoing, you know, creating a story for a brand? Let's start with Thomas.
I think the core thing for me is really understanding who the audience is that we're speaking to begin with. And I think, again, you know, it's a much remarked and much joked about comment that people will often say, my audience is everybody. And I don't think that's true. I don't think that's even true of major Hollywood blockbuster films. You always start with an intended demographic who is your key audience, and I think often in marketing, it's that niche within that demographic who is then going to share that with your wider audience, and they're going to bring attention to it, because that's generally how visual content works, and we've been conditioned to that by cinema, by television, by all the other kind of visual medium that we consume. So I think in a way, it's trying to kind of sit there and think about with a brand when we meet with them, is trying to understand that audience, trying to understand what the niche within that audience is, trying to understand what are the trigger points that are going to motivate that audience to, you know, move their thinking and take action, because ultimately that's what we're here to do. A visual story, regardless of what it is, has to have an objective for the brand. It has to have something in it for the audience. It has to have something for the brand that works. It has to be designed to make them, you know, finish watching it and go and do something, whether that is, you know, go out and buy a product, whether it is, you know, communicate with the brand, whatever it is, you have to be clear on those objectives. So our process is to really understand that, and from that kind of get to the core of what is a great story that is going to help achieve that. And then where are the emotional beats in that story that will connect with the audience? And again, understanding that audience might be fragmented. So do we need to have a couple of different stories that will help connect with different elements of that audience, because they may not be the same. You know, that's the world that we live in now. Right. You know, and designing a real strategy around it that goes with the story. Because I think, again, you have to be very strategic about video, because video is now ubiquitous. It's everywhere. You are no longer competing just with your competitors. You're competing with every digital experience that everybody has in their daily life. You know, people rate brands against, you know, I might rate your brand against Uber because Uber just has a great user experience for me and it connects in a really great way. So you sort of have to understand that that's the landscape you're in. So to differentiate that, you have to have a great story. You know, you have to kind of reach those points, and then I think from there, you flesh out the concept, you make the content, and then obviously in terms of distribution, you're also then looking at what is the best platform to achieve that and get the result that you're looking for.
Got it. Frida?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's very similar to you said, Thomas. I think what we need to understand in order for us to sort of soundtrack or provide music, we like to be very early in the creative process. It's always hard to get sort of let in at the end and say, could you place a track against this? Because you want to be part of the creative journey.
Does that happen to you often?
It does happen, yes.
Yeah.
You know, we need a track for this, and then, you know, send us a 5 that you think sounds good, and then we try to, you know, backtrack and perhaps slow down the process a bit, which sometimes the customers
Reverse engineer, yeah.
bit annoyed. But of course, we want to make sure that we understand to point the target audience, not just the messaging, but what's the story, what we want to achieve, who's the target audience, what's the brand like, what's the tone of voice. So we can make sure, especially if it's long form, it's very important then you can actually use the music, can come in, or the sound come in a bit slower, and then accentuate as the storytelling increases as well. So truly understand the storyline and making sure that the music works with the storyline and doesn't take over, doesn't confuse. And I think in order for us to do that well, we'd like to sort of truly understand the creative process and to be part of that.
Right. The next question, I think, is you answered part of it already, but what difficulties or challenges do you face with your clients? Because your clients are often big brands that, think they know everything, but you're coming in to try and help them tell a good story. Maybe Frida can start.
Yeah, I think sometimes it's like you come in and you ask, what's your sonic branding? What's your music strategy? What do you want to sound like? What's your tone of voice? And then there's nothing. And then we want to sort of step it back and not to make a massive process, but truly understand and help the brand. And that can cause some friction if there's under a lot of time constraints and they want to send us a playlist of 10 tracks to use, for example. So I would say that's one of them. And sometimes also the discussion about what's music worth? What do you pay for a track? We really value our artists and we want to give them a platform to grow and we want to pay them fairly. So we're quite defensive as well. And I think if you have great creatives, they should also make a living out of it. So sometimes that can also be discussion.
Interesting, yeah.
I love all the brands we work with. I don't know what you're talking about.
You don't have any problem whatsoever.
No.
Ever.
No.
Everybody loves Thomas.
They do, it's true. It's horrible to be this loved. No, I would agree with some of Frida's points. I think that the value in video is a really hard conversation to have at this point in time because, again, there are so many different ways of making video. Because digital has impacted the way that we make content. It has reduced the barrier to entry for a lot of people. So there are way more competitors than there ever were. It is a crowded marketplace when it comes to video content. So proving value, I think particularly with new clients, is always a challenge to kind of go through and make them understand that, apples are not apples. They are, different. We might be a Fuji apple. We're slightly, a little bit more expensive, but that's because we're going to go through an entire process with you. We're not here just to be an executional video production company. We are here to understand what it is that you want and to build a long-term strategic partnership that is about understanding your brand to the core. I want to know everything. I'm really nosy. I love brands. I love to kind of come in and sit there and go, no, I want to know everything. I really do. Before I even work with you the first time, I want to know everything. Because that will help me build a really great story for you. That will help me to understand your audience. So I think those are the challenges, and that in a way, for me, my ideal client is somebody who has a large-scale audience they need to communicate with on a regular basis, who understands and appreciates the quality of great video storytelling, who understands that it will be a process that we go through to begin with, but the end result for them is going to deliver the results that they want, and that everything will be considered. I mean, to get to Frida's point, for me, music is a really important part of the process, so that will be a large consultation piece when we come to that, because it's going to create that feeling. So we will go through that. I don't want to go through just, I need a fast music track, No.
Right.
What is the feeling we want from the music track? Let's start with that, and go from there.
Wonderful. Well, we're running low on time, so we'll just, last question, just briefly, what if you could pinpoint a couple of takeaways from this panel that you'd like people to walk away with, what would they be? Frida, we can start with you.
Well, that brands are incredibly valuable, and I think it's important to sort of look after them and think carefully about how you communicate, where and why, and be careful with trends and to be too maybe flippant and going back and forth. Stay true to the core and do it well and do it with the quality.
I think to think about the long-term storytelling objectives of your brand is really important. To think about not just campaigns, not just individual executional pieces, but what is the long-term story of your brand that you're telling through every piece of content that you're making? I think that's really important, because that is something that, again, audiences can find a through line, they can find a connective piece that brings value to them. And trying to kind of pinpoint what that is really important. That would be one of my key takeaways. The other one is to really think about how you want people to feel more, because I think that is so important.
Right.
Yeah,
Yeah.
in visual storytelling and in what Frida does as well. Yeah.
Absolutely. That's great. Thank you so much. I think that's a great
you.
place to stop. Everybody, a big hand. Thomas
Thank you.
Elliott of Casual, Frida Jones, Epidemic Sound.